Sup, gang? Thanks for tuning into our podcast, Skeptic Minds, where we integrate philosophical concepts with practical application. Our intention is to bring deep, visceral meaning to our lives as well as yours.
And if you'd like to support the podcast, we have a link in our Patreon in the description, where you can donate to help keep the podcast up and running, as well as links to all of our social media. If you'd like to support the podcast through non-fiscal means, you can like and follow the podcast or tell a friend.
Our reality is our perspectives. Explore new ones with us, Colton Winters and Brock Epperson.
Today we will be discussing sort of a topic that's talked about in Anti-Oedipus, sort of.
Yeah.
We're talking about machines and flow, as well as some other tangential concepts, I bet.
Yeah, it's and like I kind of thought that sparked that I want to discuss as well during the podcast is is materialism an inherent product of capitalism? Like, does capitalism necessarily produce materialism? And if so, like something that the book suggests is we're all desiring production machines, and so basically if capitalism is the thing that's controlling the desiring production machines, then capitalism controls the flow, or like where humanity is going, like where the people are going, the direction essentially of the flow, as they term it. And I guess also if it produces materialism, I would say materialism is a bad thing, because that is like a
Suboptimal flow.
Optimal direction of your river flow. And so if capitalism necessarily produces that, then I would say capitalism, there's an argument that, and I don't know like if it necessarily says that capitalism is bad, but more so just like that it has there's a potential flaw in it, or something that needs to be investigated.
Absolutely. I super agree. I think if we should probably expand upon what we mean when we say machines and flow.
Yes, yeah, like go into the terminology now that we've kind of like given a brief synopsis of what it'll be about.
Yeah.
Do you want to
give a rundown of machines and you go for flow?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
We can do that.
So, my understanding of machines is, in a way, like the way that we operate in the world, we are machines, as well as there's more.
Or they use some more specific, and then also like desiring production.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
You're all good. We're desiring, producing machines, and that's like a part of what it is to be a machine. And there's larger machines, as in capitalism can be seen as a machine. A vehicle can be seen as a machine. And
a political movement,
a political
party, any like form or like ism, they call movements. It the ism. Yeah, like if you're like being a Freudian or a Jungian, or like any follower of a single person or a single like
Marxist
ideal. Yeah,
true. And all of these machines, kind of the way that they interact gives us flow. You want to start getting into that?
Oh yes, that was my cue.
Yeah.
Oh, bad.
You're good.
Okay. And so flow is essentially what they are. I say essentially so much now, and it's annoying the shit out of me, but it's okay. Now that I'm wary of it, I can like no longer say it. But anyways, flows are okay. So everything has a flow in that, how do I describe this? Everything is moving towards a certain direction, as in like it's being driven by a desiring production machine, and since there's always something that's going to be produced by the desiring production machine, everything is working together to form a flow in a like kind of general direction, and the flow is being either blockaded. I guess a more proper analogy is like it's a a bunch of different rivers. And so like I was trying to think of if there was a word for that. Like in my head it's like a swampy area where it's like maybe an ocean, and then from the ocean like millions of different rivers are spawning out.
What's that word that they used for like the roots entangling? You know that word that they were using for like all of these flows and machines intertangling like a root system?
A
Rhizome?
rhizome,
Rhizome?
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the vines essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine like a vine network, but of flows, like of rivers essentially. And there, I said it. But anyways, and so, and kind of like a mental imagery that got brought to mind when listening to this podcast and like more about this and like hearing it described is the idea of each person is a pebble, and so and each person can only ever be a pebble. No one will ever be a rock or a boulder, but the pebbles can speak to the other pebbles and call them to join their cause in either blockading the river or changing the flow to a different direction. And like if you transition that to different social movements, like a single pebble is trying to influence other pebbles into changing society or the way society is flowing, or like a political system is flowing into a certain direction or a different direction, or just halting a certain flow completely. Or
because these flows affect machines.
Yes. Yeah.
Yet machines also affect flows. Like flows are like almost a transcendent part of machines, and this transcending phenomena like comes back and then affects the pebbles.
I feel like the flow is almost an analogy, so that way people don't get the idea that each pebble is a stagnant thing and just is. And so like, or each desiring production machine is a stagnant is thing. And I feel like the concept of the flow encourages the idea that it's forever moving, forever changing, forever like it's moving, and it's not just like a bunch of stagnant little pieces or people that are just who they are, or the social movement is what it is, capitalism is what it is, the government is what it is, I am who I am. Rather, every single thing is like a moving piece that's flowing towards just permanently moving and changing, and like because that's changing other things. And
I had never heard a framing of it in this sort of way, or like a new conceptualization of like an ontology being like a metaphysical idea or belief. And the ontology that it seems that Anti-Oedipus proposes is that there's not an essence to something. Essence comes from difference rather than difference coming from essence, meaning that like you and I we don't have an essence of being different until we compare the differences.
Yeah, that was another part that they like pretty importantly hit on, or at least for me that was important. Like it was a very interesting reframing. And at least in my initial, like as of right now, I like believe it's pretty accurate. And so what that kind of like suggests is who a person is, or like what anything is, but let's just take a person for example. Oftentimes it might be looked at as like, oh, this person is just not like inherently shy, or a good football player, or plays a trombone, he's a trombone player, or he's a mathematician, he is whatever these things are. And that is what makes us different, these identities. But rather it's the like how do I phrase this well?
The observation, or
it's the difference in itself that gives the person the identity. Rather like it's the fact that there is difference that gives that person their own unique identity, rather than like I phrase that terribly.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think I know a good example of it. Like the idea of, a lot of people say, why do we have a term for atheist? Because there's a significant difference from like the default of, a lot of societies being religious. Being in Utah, like it's pretty standard to be LDS or Mormon, and so I think that it is like a useful thing to like have a scribe essentially from observing the difference, an essence of like not the default.
Yeah. But it's interesting because then they later proposed that like just identity is so detrimental, and like I definitely grasp
Yeah.
that as true, and that's something I've
Yeah.
extended so much further. Like I remember that was one of the more initial conversations we had relating to philosophically, like philosophy or philosophical concepts. I remember we were at your parents' house in a jacuzzi and we are talking about like, or maybe it was after we were chilling in the jacuzzi or something. We like we had discussed just the general idea of like identifying with things and how that might play an influence on who you are as a person, your psyche, like your essence,
Mm-hmm.
kind of attaching yourself to these certain identities and how that could be detrimental. And now it's kind of gone so much further to where one, I've learned more about it obviously, but I've almost reached a point where I feel as though, at least for myself, I think any identity is a negative.
Yeah.
And especially with this new reframing that not entirely new reframing, but this like perspective that they suggest or that they mention in the book, which is to identify with something or to be a certain person or to dedicate oneself towards a certain ism, to be like anything, to not try new things and to stay comfortable in being a certain type of person or committing certain types of actions or believing certain things or learning about certain things. If you keep that narrow, that only ever grants you one perspective
Mm-hmm.
or one way to view the world, or like your perspectives are so limited. Obviously, you're gonna have more than like one, even though technically everyone only has one.
Only has their perspective.
Yeah, but like your singular perspective is therefore bound by your lack of experience or like knowledge in other areas, and so you may be the smartest person ever when it comes to the teachings of Marx or like the suggestion in the book Marx or Freud.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that matter? Because at the end of the day, they were only a human, and they were only able to like they were only a human who produced ideas, and to dedicate yourself entirely to a like specifically singular point of view will like narrow your, I don't know, your ability to perceive things from a different light, and I think your overall wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. And every once in a while, I do think about. I can't think about who wrote the book, but it's a book about dichotomies, and it wasn't necessarily about like how we identify, but about thinking about things in life as dichotomies rather than thinking about, to make this into like an applicable like observation of like you and I can probably like conceptualize the harm that can be done from even something like innocuous or perceived as good as being like, oh, I identify as an honest person. Like you and I can find the harm that might be coming from that.
Yeah.
Um,
Real
however,
quick, I want to identify what potential harm there might be
Yeah.
in arising from attaching yourself to the identity of being an honest person or like someone who's truthful.
Mhm.
So and this is kind of just generally, I think this like line of thinking applies to any general statement that might be positive about oneself. In that when you do commit those acts of dishonesty, first of all, you're not truly recognizing yourself for what you fully can be and are at times. That's one issue. But also, and going along with that, shunning that part of yourself might make you, and also like I feel as though it may encourage the disgust of people who do exhibit those actions, because you like kind of view it as a negative thing, like, oh, I could never be someone who lies. I'm such an honest person. I am all this, and so when someone does lie, you're like, oh, ew, like how low of them, like that may be. But also, when you commit these lies yourself, if you do view yourself as an honest person, when you do fall into like moments of where you slip up and lie, or like something happens where you feel the need to lie, then that, I don't know, cognitive dissonance may weigh on you to the point where you have this like negative perception of yourself that is just overwhelming, and you start to feel unhappy with yourself. You're like, who am I now? I'm not an honest person. Like, you start to question, you go into an existential crisis, like, who am I now? Like, I'm no longer an honest person. Like, or I'm someone who is loyal and would never cheat. Let's say you cheat, now you're like, who am I? Like, or I'm a good husband, but your wife cheats on you, now you don't even have a wife, so like, who are you?
And I think to tie that into the turning them into like dichotomies, I think it may be important to, if we're not fully rejecting labels, let's say, thinking about yourself as an honest person and thinking about the dichotomy between like being an honest person and being somebody who lies, and understanding that you probably shouldn't be like a fully honest person, of like pointing out things in people.
I don't know, have you read Sam Harris Lying? Never lie.
Oh yeah, true.
So what are your reasons for thinking, like, what in your mind, what are some exceptions? I'm curious. To where it's okay to lie.
Perhaps about like I don't know, if somebody asks to hang out and you really don't want to hang out, perhaps for even embarrassing reasons, to where like this isn't
I've
like
had diarrhea all morning.
yeah, or even I don't know,
I'm
like
Prager's.
yeah, or you want me to hang out, like, no, we're in a pandemic. Like, you know, but when it really comes down to
I don't think that's good though. I don't think that's an excusable reason to lie. Like, I don't. It also just depends on where, like, what your moral scale or compass is, and like if you even value lying as a moral, like, bad. And so
yeah, for myself, like, to me, lying isn't the worst thing. Obviously, like, a lot of instances, or most instances, you probably shouldn't lie. It seems like lying does more harm than good most often. But I think lies can be like a comforting thing for a lot of people, and it's not really necessary for a lot of people to be 100% honest. Of every, like, honesty to even a degree of, like, if somebody sees a bad quality in another person that's like not even affecting them or anybody, but they see that bad quality and pointing that out, like, I don't know.
Well, I think it depends. Like, I have a tendency to, like, I can be prone to pointing out things if I view them as like potentially negatively impacting the person, especially if I care about them. And so I think it is definitely wrong, or not wrong, to point out things that are like they can't really change, or like that are just innate in the person, such as if someone's missing an eyeball, just be like, haha, one eye is like I think that's probably pretty messed up. But to, like, if someone is, I don't know, constantly lying all the time, like to a level where it's just crazy, or they are stealing from you, or like they are just randomly calling people ugly or something like that, like, I think it's acceptable to call them out on that, to hopefully, and the reason I think it's okay is because I feel as though that is a negative trait that is not negative like in the sense that, like, oh, it's just negative, like, that's bad of them, but more so it's I think it's going to negatively impact their mental well-being and overall ability to experience pleasure throughout life,
and like functionality in life, which leads to experience and pleasure in life. I totally agree. And I'm not necessarily proposing this as in, like, I believe this over rejecting labels, but I think that perhaps it's, if somebody's not willing to move towards rejecting labels, perhaps like dichotomies would be healthier than somebody who's just fully grasped into their labels.
And expand on dichotomy.
Dichotomy being like, we have like the idea of honesty, and then we can have like dishonesty on a sliding scale, where like in the middle of this dichotomy probably isn't the good place to be, where you're lying 50-50, but understanding that you can have a sliding scale where some amount of lies probably aren't okay, or some amount of lies are okay, but you don't want to be lying all the time. You don't want to be a completely honest person lying about, or not lying, but being like honest to the degree where you tell everybody everything on your mind,
Yeah.
like the person who's going around telling everybody they're ugly all the time, like if that's
Yeah.
genuinely how they feel about people too, like, and they
Yeah.
maybe
So you would couple deception in with that lying, because I would say that that's probably not lying if you withhold that calling them ugly, but it's
yeah,
technically deception.
yeah, that could be, or even
Or like,
that doesn't even need to be dishonesty, but that could be another part of this dichotomy of honesty has like all of these traits that are around it that all have dichotomies between them, and it can be a sliding scale between all of these different traits that are around honesty.
it's like a rhizome,
Yeah.
except that can slide.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Oh, yeah.
I feel like this
I'm
word
curious.
turns a lot of people off, but I guess sort of like the intersectionality of like what I guess a lot of people would consider like noble traits
Expand on that.
or
What do you mean by
identities.
that? Or what do you mean?
Like, I feel like I come across a lot of people that are like, oh, I want to have the utmost honesty, the most integrity, the most courage. Like, when I think, at least in my opinion, like a healthier view, while not being, in my opinion, the healthiest view of rejecting labels, but a healthier view, if I can't get them to reject labels, would be understanding like dichotomies of all of these different traits and the intersectionality of all of them, and that if you want to be like the most courageous person ever, maybe you have to tell some lies. So then that might make your noble like identity of integrity or honesty have to like suffer a little bit because you can't quite fulfill like a fully honest person.
Yeah.
But it might be a good thing that you can't fully encompass like or be a honest person.
True. I think it's bad to like view life through those lens. Like could have potentially negative consequences and not like your.
Yep.
But I do think like that is technically like how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm curious, and I feel as though we have disagreeing opinions on this, which is why I'm bringing it up. But what's your current opinion on is intentionally like withholding information or deceiving equivalent to lying in your perspective?
I think it largely depends on like your commitment to another person. So like if I am like fully committed to somebody, whether that's through friendship or like a romantic relationship, like
How do you qualify the commitment? Because like would not some people feel more of that commitment to you than necessarily you feel towards them, and so it like wouldn't be necessarily
reciprocal.
that, and like treating their feelings fairly, because to you it's like nothing, but like to them it's maybe more to where it's more so negatively impacting them.
For sure. I think that at least from the framework that I come at it, it makes it sometimes difficult because in some regards I do need like an explicit verbal communication of where the relationship is at. Without that, I tend to have a really difficult time like understanding whether that commitment is there or not.
Yeah.
And if I haven't had that, like I just assume there has not been a commitment in any sort of way.
And so is just verbal enough for you, or like
Verbal or perhaps like nonverbal, but like very obvious like things that show that you kind of like have to be committed. Like,
I feel like verbal is reaffirming, but like what actually matters is the action, or like just I guess having the awareness about their actions to be able to properly interpret them, like the social IQ to be able to properly interpret like the meaning behind their actions, rather than necessarily like sure their word means something and it is nice to validate that like that worry or whatever you might have, or invalidate that worry that you might have about them, or them not being loyal or caring that much, and like they tell you this, but I think that all that really matters is the actions. And I guess Therefore, it's super important to be able to correctly interpret them.
To a degree. Because for me, I feel like I tend to act in like a nearly overly generous way, typically in life. Like, I will like screw myself over to make sure that other people aren't feeling screwed over, or at least I try to as much as possible, because that's just uh, what I think is like the, for one, easiest and like just optimal way to function in reality, or in social situations.
Do you feel as though you deduce some level of pleasure from that recognition that, like, hey, I went out and did this even though I didn't have to, or like some to be a bit like perhaps this would discourage you from accepting it, even though that's not what I'm trying to do. But is there perhaps some level of superiority where it's like, ooh, like I was willing to step up and help people, and like I feel so good about myself now. Like I was willing to, you know, pay for these people's meals and stuff, and like, whereas you know for a fact none of them would have paid for anyone but themselves, and like, yeah.
Not really. I think more than anything, it's just, it doesn't bring me more pleasure, but it alleviates suffering. Where I feel like I would just suffer if like I felt as though I was like screwing people over.
No.
Well, rather than like I don't feel as though like I gain anything from
That's
like
very
actually help. I don't gain anything other than the lack of suffering.
You don't feel good about yourself at all if you help people. Like there's no sense of pleasure at all derived from assisting others. Only the avoidance of displeasure, i.e., in the form of avoiding guilt. If we were to name one emotion.
Yeah, essentially. Because, and I think the one of the big aspects of why I acted in this way is because I feel like my thought process on this is one that in my mind is very logical, where I'm like, yeah, I don't really feel good being like an altruistic person, but I would feel good if other people were altruistic towards me. So I want to encourage an altruistic society because I want everybody to be like very community oriented, very
as far
helpful
as your
towards each other.
influence goes, you want it to be one of promoting altruism.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is fair.
Or not even like, because I don't actually like believe in altruism.
Or not, so maybe not promoting, but practicing.
Not even practicing, because I think that even though like I'm acting altruistically, it's for my own
it's not
gain.
But more so, I meant like the societal concept or understanding of altruistic actions.
Yeah.
I agree though. Like altruism can't exist or does not exist.
Yeah. So it's like a purely selfish thing that I act, air quote, altruistic, to reinforce in society, like a air quote altruistic action in it. Because I think when we act in this air quote altruistic way, we are enhancing society. We're making society better when people are more willing to cooperate.
And then which in turn makes your life better. Yeah. Better for the things you care about as well. If you decide to have children, or like if you care about a job, that better society is better for your job. Like whatever it may be, just ends up better for you. But fuck, what was I going to say? I don't remember.
I think it's right along the lines of two minds are better than one, essentially, but in terms of like value that we derive. So in the sense that when, even with the Industrial Revolution, I think this is actually a really good example, where before and then after the Industrial Revolution, where we started to get cities and factories where less people had to dedicate their time to simply surviving, and then we had so much more resources to like have luxury goods and more free time in our life. I think that is applicable to like society and the way that we derive value from like social interactions as well. Like I think that even if it's like not necessarily like, I don't know, maybe I don't have money for food or something, and somebody's like, oh, I'll cover you. Like, the I think the value that's created by two people cooperating to solve problems in society is going to be way greater than everybody being like, oh, rugged individualism.
Right.
Uh, like I do like the idea of like allowing people to be their individuals, but I think that if we want to derive as much pleasure from this society that we live in, we need to kind of buy into the collectivist thought of
I think
we're
that,
a
like,
part of a greater thing.
yeah, I think I totally agree. Like, I think that's an essential thing that needs to be properly influenced or indoctrinated into youth at a young age.
Yeah.
And it's not even like it's this is something that is altruistic and like you should believe this because it's good. It's like what God would want. No, that's just what's going to be best for each individual. Like this is entirely selfish, you know.
Yeah.
Like, but oh yeah, I was gonna say it ties like back in perfectly to some of the stuff that is in Anti-Oedipus.
Mm-hmm. Of being a desiring machine.
Yeah, but what did you mention?
That we create greater things combined than individually.
Oh yeah, no. What I was gonna say is it relates back to the book in the sense that when you're living your life individualistically, you're once again stuck to your perspective, and it's through experience and I guess experience with like a ton of different diverse things
Mm-hmm.
that you're granted more perspectives, and then therefore able to like properly, I don't know. When you have more perspectives, you have more things to choose from, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can choose ones that more properly aid in your journey through life.
Yeah. I'm on board with that idea. I think that yeah, when people as machines refuse to plug into other machines or connect to other machines, there's a lot of stagnation.
Yeah. Then how useful, like how much purpose could you have when your machine is just by itself in a little corner, like not being used at all, but rather it it now has, or like it inherits purpose
Mm-hmm.
from its connection to other machines.
Yeah. It's kind of like the idea of, I think we can all think of a person who's similar to a pebble sitting in the middle of a flow, just standing there saying, I'm standing here because I'm against this flow, but I'm so individualistic that I'm not going to push anybody else to do anything they like.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like we can do that, but like
That's not going to do anything.
yeah, it's not going to do anything. Like, and how practical, or not even practical, but how useful and how much meaning is derived from this rugged individualism.
Yeah. I feel like it probably derives a lot from the attachment of to identities, and
Yeah.
I can say it's definitely comfortable, but overarchingly, I don't think it's beneficial.
I'd say it's almost self-aggrandizing.
Expand.
Like, I think that you have to think that you're greater than you are. You have to almost think that you are a machine that's on the level of like just a greater machine
God.
than you are. Yeah.
You are omniscient.
Yeah, nearly. Like,
Yeah.
or you're on the same level as an individual as the machine of capitalism, or not necessarily even that, but like the machine of a community,
A global economy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
like
Banking.
yeah, you think that you're
the most powerful
Yeah.
machine. Banking.
yeah, and I think that part of this is machines, or the level of machine that we are. I think it's super useful to and realistic to recognize what level of machine we are, and that we can't.
Though you can, as a machine, you can create other grander machines, social movements, political parties,
Mm-hmm.
being the president, and therefore having the United States, obviously not exactly, but the United States as your machine. It's like an analogy would be a human needs to move this giant rock. And so what does he do? He makes a machine, i.e.
A lever or a pulley.
Yeah, pulley, and like, or even what's the one that I'm blanking right now, like one of those cranes. Is it just called a crane?
I think you're just thinking of a crane.
Yeah, and so they build a crane, and so they're in there driving the machine, driving the crane to aid them in their goal. And so people can take over or like create a political movement or become president, drive this machine to aid their own goals as like a more individual machine. So you kind of can like be bigger than you are in the sense that you're like, but you need other machines to aid you.
Yeah, it's a vehicle that it's a larger vehicular machine that we can operate.
Yeah, something
perhaps
individual. A driver driving something with a bunch of other drivers in that car. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of use to be derived from Anti-Oedipus's perspective.
Yeah. Oh, we should talk now about what we started off the podcast with. Does capitalism inherently produce materialism? What do you think?
I think it's not inherent, but I think that it is a tendency. Or at the very least a likely probability if we don't take precautions against it. I'm trying to think of an analogy for it, but like I think if we're in like let's say a feudalistic society and then we switch over to a capitalist society, already like predisposed to care and like be concerned about materialism or consumerism, I think that we're probably not going to have the pitfalls that we have currently. It doesn't seem like too many people are worried about the pitfalls of materialism or consumerism, because it seems like we switched from feudalism to capitalism with a huge need to give people more stuff, but more so like basic necessities of like food, water, shelter, but like they were so needed that people didn't even think about like consumerism being at the level that it is today, where like people are wasting so much money on things that even I waste my money on, like I don't know, things that you might buy for $1 at the store, but then you will never think about, like it does not enhance your lived experience in any meaningful way.
Yeah. Do you think that it's possible that this materialism has been produced by a more, and it's kind of relating to what they suggested in the book, that Freudian view of we are desire driven, and so if you give into that mindset of I'm desire driven, then you're just looking, like they said, to fill desires. And yes, you're trying to control which desires you have and like which desires you, if you believe in free will, are choosing to fill. But like nonetheless, you're still only ever desiring to fill a certain desire. And so with that, maybe with that mindset, maybe you're just constantly thinking like super subconsciously, what hole do I need to fill now? What desire needs to be filled now? And eventually, if people aren't relating to Maslow's hierarchy, once people have those basic needs filled, they need another hole filled with this mindset. They need another desire filled. And if they're not encouraged to pursue more intellectual, pursuits, then they perhaps get stuck at a certain level because they're no longer pursuing the higher tiers in the pyramid, actualization, stuff like that. And they just get stuck at desiring cars, money, all these materialistic things, which is lower on the pyramid, but they're not given, opportunity to be granted that perspective of desiring actualization or the higher tiers of the pyramid.
Yeah, sort of like the first few steps of Maslow's hierarchy being like food, water, shelter, then like developing like social friends, and like there's all these pyramids of what we need, and at the very top is this self-actualization. And I think, yeah, perhaps people, it seems very obviously difficult to fulfill those very first few, but then once we've gotten past those,
depending on where you are.
yeah, I think a lot of people think like, oh, once I fulfill these, it's gonna be easy street. Like, I just want to relax. I like want to take it easy.
Enjoy life.
Yeah, enjoy life. And I think in that, like falling into the enjoyment of life too much, you fall into like materialism and consumerism. Whereas I think if you were really to try to complete Maslow's hierarchy, it's going to be just as hard for self-actualization as it might actually even be more difficult to fulfill that last triangle.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Like, but obviously that's me being in a position of privilege where I don't have to care about my food or worry about food or water or even specifically friends at this point in my life. Like, luckily I have roommates who I hang out with. Mm-hmm. So like there are certain levels needs being met, and so, you know, for me at least, it's much easier. But like, obviously, obviously some people struggle with just get the basis of the pyramid and can never get past that point.
Yeah.
And like, I guess maybe that's a call to duty to ensure that everyone across the world, or as many people as possible, are at least able to get that basis covered, which obviously many people are trying to do. But
yeah, sometimes it makes me wonder if introducing too many people into like closer to these final steps of Maslow's hierarchy
too early
can be like somewhat dangerous, or not even necessarily dangerous, but like ambivalent.
And maybe it could be potentially distracting from those basic needs, or like you said, it makes them like it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like it's just going in one ear out the other, because like they're like, I can't even eat. Why would I care about any of this other stuff? Like, yeah, true. But then you also don't want to make it a thing of privilege, just the opportunity to pursue actualization of these higher tiers. Yeah. And so
yeah, it's a really difficult question to solve, I think.
Just go this way. Camera can't see you.
Oh, cool.
Everyone wants to see your pretty face.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's a really difficult problem to solve. It almost like it begs the question of, is it okay to withhold like people's like achieving of Maslow's hierarchy in order to subvert like the consequences of what will happen if we push too many people through Maslow's hierarchy too quickly. In almost a similar way of like, if you throw somebody into a job that needs a lot of training but you don't really train them enough, like is it better to like just not hire somebody if you're not going to train them well, or is it better to hire somebody who has poor training to handle like a fragile situation?
I think it's definitely, at least in my opinion, like, this reminds me of I don't know, I heard this analogy, I'm pretty sure in like high school or middle school, where it's like, you need to make sure the base is sturdy so that way the top can like have a strong foundation. I think there's like a Bible analogy about that, about like building your house in like sand versus like rocks or something like that. You need to have a good foundation.
My family always had a funny joke about, like, my family's pretty tall, and we had a joke about tall people, like, you can't build a mansion on a shit foundation, which was like a joke about like, if you're tall but you have small feet, it doesn't really count. Like, but it was just it's just a joke of
sorry, I forgot
having
to
small
laugh.
feet. Yeah. I always thought that was so funny growing up.
But it is true, I think.
To some degree, yeah. Not my analogy, but yours.
Yeah, at least relating to Maslow's hierarchy. And that's also like something I had, I don't know, transitioned almost to in them, like, my pyramid of care. And so I have to start with myself. That's the basis of my pyramid of care. I have to care about myself first and make sure everything is like taken care of to at least a relatively reasonable degree. From there, I can move to like I don't know, one person I specifically care about, or a couple people that are, whether it be a spouse or if I have kids one day or a close friend, I can extend it to them and make sure that I'm having as positive an influence on them as possible, as well as like they're doing well, they're living a life that is most likely going to produce the most amount of pleasure, not only short term but long term, and like I don't know, just try and encourage a responsible lifestyle, and then from there, I can move to maybe like I don't know my general family, like my community essentially. From there, move to I don't know the U.S., etc. Like you can slowly move outwards, but it has to start with yourself. And I see that as kind of like my pyramid of care, similarly to Maslow's hierarchy, where you have to start at the base and move up. Otherwise, you just end up like building, like I don't know. I almost view it as you have the foundation, and so you can either make the foundation like solid concrete, or you can make it like I don't know, one of those jungle gym contraption things where you fall in between the nets. Have you ever seen that? It's like 6 different nets, and you just like you can climb up to the top and then fall all the way through.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, or you can make it out of nets, and so like you have a risk of falling at each stage in between the nets because
you haven't built it sturdy enough.
Yeah, you didn't fully establish the earlier ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really apt analogy. I think a lot of people don't have the tools when prompted into an existential crisis. Nobody's given concrete when they're spiraling into an existential crisis and their house burns down. And I think that, like, as a society, we kind of, or not necessarily even as a society, but I think society, we need to step in and provide concrete to people, or even like as parents, we need to be better. Well, we're not parents, but like parents in general, I think
as
need
teachers.
to be teachers. Like we need to be providing this concrete.
Or influencers.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remove that like the other connotations.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and as people, as influencers, we need to be providing concrete for people who are eventually going to be having existential crises. In my opinion, hopefully, like I hope everybody at some point has an existential crisis.
Is crisis the apt word? Would you want them more so to go through an existential realization or like
rediscovery?
Horror-y?
Yeah, I think perhaps that's a more accurate word.
Yeah, because I don't know if we want necessarily everyone to go into crisis. Like some level of crisis can be beneficial, but like,
for sure.
But anyways,
Then.
Yeah, but I do agree, and I think like an important way is just something we discussed before, integrating perspectives or thoughts that are going to later aid in the prevention of these existential crises at a young age. Like, I guess, philosophical concepts, which sounds like, oh, that'd be too complex, or like, no, it doesn't need to be anything complex, but there's certain ideas that can be introduced at a kind of young age, and that may influence a mode of being and way of being about the world, that one encourages more community, encourages self-actualization, encourages individuation, like all these different things, as well as aids in the prevention of acquired mental illnesses. And so obviously by that I don't mean like things you're born with or things that happen throughout your life, that like a TBI or something, but like acquired mental illnesses. Existential crisis, like the actual crisis, various mental blights that could potentially arise throughout life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that's good enough for episode 5?
I sure do.
Cool. All right.
Episode 5.
I don't know what the title of this podcast episode was.
Machines and flows.
Desiring
perhaps.
machines and flows. Yeah. True. Or machines and flows. We could do that. Perfect. Yeah. And then gotta get the quote real quick.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So it's going with the existentialist vibe. It is not only for what we do that we are held responsible, but also for what we do not do. And that was by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Mollere, Moliere. Moliere, I think. Something, but yes. Cool. Thanks for listening to our podcast.
Check us out on YouTube.
Skeptic Minds on
Skeptic
YouTube.
Minds.
We got a Patreon, Skeptic Minds. We got a Twitter, Skeptic Minds Pod. We got
Patreon.
yeah, I said that.
Oh.
Just check us out on all the socials except for Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok so far. But yeah, and if you want to support the podcast monetarily, you can check out our Patreon.
Yep.
And if you want to support us in some other way that's not monetary, then you can tell a friend, subscribe to our YouTube, hit the follow button on Spotify, you know.
Yeah.
However you can help.
I really liked the Sam Harris does a podcast where he talks about if you think this podcast is worth a cup of coffee, you know, spend what a cup of coffee is worth to you on our Patreon. We'd really appreciate it. And if you can't spend a cup of coffee because whatever financial reasons, don't worry about it.
No.
Tell a friend, subscribe. It helps.
It does. All right, cool. Thanks for listening.
Episode 5.